Upshalopsy, welcome, and thank you for tuning in and joining us on Tripside Transit's first virtual trip. In this video, we will be exploring Sandy Lake Sackville River Regional Park. Tripside Transit is a non-profit organization working towards a world where there are no barriers preventing people from connecting with ourselves, our communities, and the natural world. TBT offers free public programming, and we aim to promote a culture of accessibility, inclusivity, and mutual respect. All of Tripside Transit's programming takes place in Migma, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Migma people. Ceded land is a formal surrender and change of possession. To include that we are on unceded territory is a statement of awareness that the Migma people never gave their land to colonial settlers. In fact, the treaties of peace and friendship that cover this territory recognize Indigenous sovereignty and title, as well as establish rules for what is supposed to be an ongoing relationship between nations.
Colonization was, and is, a violent act. With the founding of Halifax in 1749, under orders of Edward Cornwallis, who was the first governor of Nova Scotia to govern from Halifax, which was established under his supervision, a genocide against the Migma people was planned and executed.
These focused efforts to exterminate Indigenous populations from Mi'kmaq was propelled by the Scalping Proclamations, which offered a bounty for the scalps of Mi'kmaq men, women, and children. Colonial governments did not honor and continue to ignore their treaty obligations and the treaty rights of the Mi'kmaq. To this day, there is much work to be done to dismantle the structures that support and enable white supremacy. Those with privilege and power must work alongside systematically oppressed groups as accomplices to break oppressive structures and systems in order to reimagine and build a just Mi'kmaq. We must do better. We are all treaty people.
In an effort to reduce the spread of COVID-19, please ensure you follow the most up-to-date public health directives when engaging and participating in TBT's programming. For more and latest information, visit www.canada.ca/coronavirus and novascotia.ca/coronavirus. And check out halifax.ca for specific municipality updates.
I encourage everyone to stay connected and grounded to the living history of this land as we explore the beautiful Sandy Lake Sackville River Regional Park located in Weepec, commonly known as Bedford.
Personally, I think one of the sweetest swim spots in the city. You can get to it by transit. It's got a naturally sandy beach. The local people, when this was created, fought to keep this area of trees here, which helps with erosion and it helps with shade when you're here in the summer. So it's got a really natural feel, quite on purpose because the community wanted that. And it's got change rooms and it's got trails that lead here. And there's a lifeguard here in the summer. So it's a really, really sweet spot that actually not a ton of people know about Halifax. The lake is fantastic for swimming because it's a deep blue lake. So if you've been to some of the other lakes in the Halifax area, they're sometimes tea-colored and people call them a tea lake and they're really brown. And that's fine and normal, there's nothing wrong and you can totally swim in those lakes. But this lake is not tea-colored. It's very clear and blue and really well oxygenated. And it has been a very healthy lake. It's supported all sorts of fish populations. It's got lots of amphibians and reptiles around the sides and it's very marshy and it's very life-filled. And that's because the water chemistry here is fantastic. We really need to keep the woods around the lake intact to keep that water chemistry that makes it fantastic for people and is central to keeping all the life here going. And so there hasn't been any more development since then, but there absolutely could be. Most of the land around that side of the lake is owned by development companies who ultimately would want to put housing developments in there. And HRM and Ecology Action Center and all the partners are not against housing developments. but there are areas to put them that would be less impactful than there. So if you were to clear all that land, it would affect the water chemistry of the lake, which then feeds into the Sackville River, and it would also affect that. And that would really be too bad, because that's that river that's been so fantastic for bringing salmon back. But all of it is contingent on the water chemistry of this lake. Park is such a delightful place for learning about different types of the Acadian Forest, so the naturally occurring forest in Nova Scotia. There's different sort of flavors of it, even when it gets really old. So one flavor or version is the forest we've just come through. And so even without knowing the tree species, it has like these certain characteristics. So I find when I come through this forest, it's pretty dark. And even on the hottest day, it's very cool and very moist, and it self-perpetuates this own microclimate. So then because it's cool and moist and dark, only species that can handle that keep coming up in that forest. So the main species that give it that characteristic are eastern hemlock and red spruce. Species that would be in here are pileated woodpecker. So they're pretty big. When I first see them, it looks like a cat in a tree. It's like a pretty big bird for Nova Scotia. And it's white and black and has this super awesome red mohawk at the back. And so they are a big, strong woodpecker. So if a tree is already dead, they can hear the insects under the bark. And so they'll peck on the tree to get the wood and the bark off, and then stick their ultra long tongue in the tunnels that the bugs have made, and then their forked tongue will catch the bug and bring it back out and put it in their mouth. Cool. So they need to do that, and they make hollows in the tree both to live in and as part of their looking for food. And then that facilitates things like owls, like this barred owl living here. So they need a big old tree with a giant hole in it to make their nest, but they can't make that themselves. Only a woodpecker this big could make a hole big enough for them. So this is where you sort of start to get that cascade effect. Once you have the big old trees and some of them die, and you get the woodpeckers move in, and then they create the habitat for the other birds to move in. So both barred owl and pileated woodpecker have been found to be breeding in this area. They have the right habitat characteristics here. Ovenbird is a mostly ground-dwelling bird, and they make a sound for whatever reason where they go, teacher, 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 teacher. Like they're super mad at their teacher for some reason. No other bird sounds like that. And their name, ovenbird, comes from the fact that they nest on the ground and they weave grass together and make what looks like a little oven that you would access from the side, like a stone oven. And they go in the side of it and make their nest in there. So they are very shy. I mean, other than the teacher yelling thing. So they won't nest within 60 or 70 meters of the edge of a forest. They need a forest to be big enough to have a forest edge and a forest interior. They're a forest interior bird. So we do have ovenbird nesting here because there's a big enough patch of forest here for them to feel comfortable. Another bird that you might hear and see, rarely see, but hear a lot here, is northern parula. They're a type of warbler, and they also have a very distinct call. It sounds like a whirring sound that gets knocked on the head. So it goes bonk, bonk. Like somebody cut them off and was like, enough of that. And they flit around in the trees. They eat a lot of spiders and moths. And they only nest using that lichen called old man's beard. If you've ever seen that long, green, thin lichen. They need to get a bunch of that and kind of ball it up and make a hole in it to make their nest. And that only comes along if you leave trees long enough to get big and to get the lichens to grow. The lichens only grow a couple millimeters a year. It's also fantastic for forest bathing. So I've actually brought groups here and just spread out and just been quiet for like 5 minutes. And it's really powerful, especially for people who don't get to do that very often. Just time sort of loses meaning and your senses get turned on a little bit more. And it's just, even just 5 minutes here is really quite striking what it'll do. So areas like this, because they're so rich in wildlife, they're not replaceable. This area and another couple areas are highlighted in the Halifax Green Network Plan, which would be a greenbelt plan for Halifax. So it would say these areas are irreplaceable and sacred and build a great city when we keep them intact, and sustainable development and housing should go in other places but not here. So the Halifax Green Network Plan calls out this spot as one of the most important spots to protect. So this one, I have to give a shout out to Dr. David Patrickman, who is an amazing naturalist and who has done a couple years of study on this area just because he thinks it's really interesting. So he started to find this phenomenon that he called the Acadian Forest love affair. He kept finding these pairs of trees that were beautifully intertwined at the bottom. And one of them was almost always an eastern hemlock, and one was almost always a yellow birch. Sometimes there was a mix, but usually it was these two species growing intertwined. And so he looked into it and he found there's a little bit of research that finds that when an eastern hemlock in an old forest topples over and leaves a root ball, that is an incredible opportunity. And the two species that can best take advantage of that are eastern hemlock and yellow birch. They grow better on the root ball of an old hemlock than anywhere else. So they're the first two to race there, and they're more likely to survive. And so this pair would have been on one of those mounds that we saw years ago and have grown up together, and the mound has since decomposed, and now we can see some of their what were underground roots, which are now exposed. So if you keep walking through the forest, there's all these other lovebirds like intertwined at different stages of growth, including on the top of old root balls that have just come up recently. And so these are the kinds of amazing things that you can only learn about the Acadian Forest when you leave it staying put long enough. If you were to clear this area and clear all the mounds, you would remove that opportunity that took thousands of years to evolve.
Sandy Lake, Sackville River Regional Park is a system of lakes and rivers. And at the core, there's the Sackville River that empties into the Bedford Basin. The rivers and all of their territory that empty out, the energy goes back and forth. The animals come and go. All of the things that make the system work intermingle and make the system. And so Sandy Lake is a very important part of the Sackville River system. The richness, the diversity of the wildlife that's here is what is fantastic, and that this whole area is part of the Sackville Rivers. The Sackville River is really important when you think about how much work has gone into protecting the Sackville River. If we don't protect the headwaters of the Sackville River, then all the 35 years of work to make the Sackville River, to bring it back, will suffer. When the Green Network Plan was being developed, it was still the best secret in town, and so we were working very hard and fast to put it on the plate when it was being drafted, and I think that we did succeed in the most part, because it has important corridors, wildlife corridors that are in the Green Network Plan. And it's also part of one of 5 major natural corridors, and that in all of HRM, and there are 5 of them. One is the Sackville River. I do believe that our city councillors recognize more fully now that the green spaces that we're saving are special. Mm-hmm. They are being championed because of that, and I'm thinking of several that we have all around the city that are definitely worth keeping. I think that they now recognize that is our green infrastructure. It's as important as or maybe even more important, but as important as pavement and buildings. It's very hard to reverse a development plan. But look at what is here. If you know what is here, you say, oh my gosh, let's put the houses somewhere else. Oh my gosh, we can't put houses there. We need houses too, but maybe not here. This is too valuable. And it was recognized, as I said, back in 1971 as one of 7 jewels in the Halifax-Dartmouth crown to be preserved for all time as this green ecological area, but it was lost track of over the years. I mean, the children that were here today swimming, right through to climate change for the world. I mean, all of these green places have an important role. Our decision makers really need people, the community, to tell them what's important to them. There are significant old growth Acadian Forest stands throughout the whole area. And if you see the Department of Lands and Forestry's map of old growth forest in the province, you know that's less than 1% of the Acadian forest in the province is old growth. But if you look at the map of Sandy Lake, there's purple all over that map. I mean, there's lots and lots of old growth in here. So that means that it is an old forest, and it can be a home to the kinds of creatures that live only in old forests. As someone said, you can't pry a barred owl into a hole in a 10-inch tree. So that's just a joke, a funny way of saying there are creatures who live only in old forests, and they're here. From an educational point of view, quite an amazing thing that you could walk onto the grounds of this park, and within walking distance you'll see an example of a boreal forest. You see the Sweet Lake with the old Acadian forest. You see a marsh lake with black ducks and all of the creatures that live in a large, substantial marsh lake. You have tributaries and brooks, tributaries, and then the large river with salmon. From an educational point of view, that's fantastic, you know. Well, I think that the big message is that we want to get the word out for people who enjoy parks, but we also want to make sure that the people who love this park and come to love this park understand that they could love it to death. When they start to use parks anywhere, to go to the website called Leave No Trace, and learn about how to be in a park in a manner that does not degrade it, and that leaves behind everything that was there when you came, so that the next person can see it. I hope that in 2020 that people are starting to see things slightly differently, and that we owe everything that we are, that our life itself, we owe to these forests and those loons and the others who don't have a vote.
For easy on-the-go directions and route options, download the Transit app or plan your route online using other services such as Google Maps. Please be sure to check out Halifax Transit for the most recent COVID-19 service level updates and safety procedures.
Also in Weepac, there is a particular Migma sacred place where you can find petroglyphs, carvings in stone that reflect and record Migma life and history. Migma people have been living in Mi'kma'ki for over 13,000 years. This particular area in the Bedford Barrens is protected under the Nova Scotia Special Places Protection Act and is a significant historical site. This is a place for reflection. If you visit, please respect this sacred land.
From all of us at Trips by Transit, stay safe and adventure on.